there were issues that already existed. With colonialism, those issues became exacerbated. A lot of countries, when they gained independence and forming their constitutions, was also based on the British model. And what happens is it starts becoming part of a country's psyche and identity.
Hi, welcome to Changing Suits. My name's Bal.
My name's Taj.
How are you doing today?
Good, thank you. And yourself?
Yes, doing well, doing well. Usually, because before we were doing audio, it was a case of I'd always be like, oh, there's another person here. But now we're on YouTube, we can actually everyone will see it. So, yes, it's fab. So, if you haven't already, subscribe to our YouTube channel and Apple and Spotify or whatever platform you're on, just bloody well subscribe. So, today, we actually have a guest. Again, I think this is the first because we've never had a guest come on again. Have we, Taj? I can't remember.
Yeah, we have.
Oh,
But,
have we? Sorry, I guess.
not an academic.
Oh, okay. There's your first. Who was the other guest? I've got such a bad memory.
Nav.
No, Nav came on to Taboo Talk. There we are. We're doing so many projects. Taj doesn't even remember.
Yeah.
I was going to say Taj doesn't even remember where our guests are coming anymore because we're doing too much stuff. Okay, so today, hi, Dr. Gurpreet. How are you today?
Thank you so much for having me. Hello, both of you. And I am absolutely chuffed to be on this podcast again. Very, very excited.
Lovely. And the reason we have brought you back on is because after the first one, there were things that you were saying, and we were like, "Oh, we didn't know that. Oh, another thing we didn't know." So we were like, "Okay, let's get her back on and to make her teach us more stuff." But today we are going to be talking about something very specific. This month is obviously the anniversary of the partition, and something that I've been very vocal on our podcast is we are getting more and more interested in the whole colonialism aspect of it. Where did we come from? What impact has it had on our life, not only as South Asians, but as a society as a whole? So today we are going to be talking about colonialism, and like I said earlier, we'll see where the conversation goes because I'm quite excited. Now, Gabby, why is it that firstly we've brought you on to talk about this topic? What is it in your professional career that has led you on this podcast today?
Thank you, Taj. So I'm actually a post-colonial scholar. So my training in academia has been in post-colonial studies, in post-colonial literature and culture, post-colonial theory, and within that, I have branched out into ecofeminism, post-colonial ecofeminism. And we can get onto that, at some other point, maybe on another podcast, which is a very, very current thing happening, particularly with connections being made between gender, environment, and climate, and how we actually have a post-colonial lens when we look at all of it. So my basic grounding is actually as a post-colonial scholar. So I deal with issues of colonialism, post-colonialism, what happens after, what are the models that are continuing on from the time we've had colonialism to now, which is called neocolonialism.
What drew you to this? Because it's a very different topic, should I say. What drew you towards working in this area?
I think it was my interest in gender, really, and one of the very, very, a field which is very predominant in gender studies is post-colonial gender theory. So how women studies, gender, etc., has been kind of configured in the post-colonial lens. So in countries in Africa, in India, in Southeast Asia, in indigenous populations that were colonized in the Australia, Canada, America. How do gender dynamics then play out with these all the other things that are happening with colonialism? So it was through that.
I was going to say, can we go back? Because I've had this conversation with one of my friends, and I was talking to her, and I said, you know what, I'm getting more and more interested in, the colonialism aspect of it, because, we've always seen it as a sort of a good thing that we're here, and there's so many positives, and without a doubt, there is positives. But I hadn't realised that there was another side to it that we just weren't exposed to. Now, prior to the British coming in, what was it actually like? Because I would have envisaged inequality. Women weren't getting educated. They weren't working, they weren't doing any of the things that you'd expect them to do now. And that was the conversation I had with my friend, and she's a doctor, and she said, well, actually, I'm glad that it happened because there's so many positives. Talk me through it. What happened before and where are we now?
So, Bal, one of the things is that there are two sides to every coin, right? There are certain things that colonialism did that actually brought a lot of positives. And I think being in 2023 or in any era, sometimes when we look to the past, I think as humans, we have a tendency to romanticize it, and we hear this very colloquially, like, oh, those were the days that this happened, etc., etc., right? But I think that is a tendency for nostalgia and romanticization to creep in. So I want to actually say something before I go, that in no way was the past a perfect past. There were issues that already existed, right? But what happened with colonialism was that those issues became exacerbated. So it was almost like an acceleration of sorts, and the divisions of power actually became more pronounced. So, say for example, if we take India, for example, so pre-colonial, it's not that India was not was new to colonization. India is one of those countries that has had repeated conquests of colonization over the years. We have seen it from Alexander the Great. We had the Mughal invasion, and then we had the British. So they're not new to these dynamics. But what happened was, before, technically, I think in terms of gender, there was a lot more, I would say, fluidity. So if we look at the Mughal era, and if we look at, for example, the harems were run by eunuchs.
Okay, you're gonna have to
I
dumb this
don't
down
know
for
what
me, Gurpreet.
you're
I don't know what that is. Dumb it
So,
down for us.
so eunuchs are basically hijras, or what we call transgenders or the third gender, right?
Hmm.
The illegality of whether that's the LGBTQ side or transgenders, etc., came with colonial laws. So this never existed pre-colonial, even though countries have had multiple conquests. So the formalization of illegality, let's say, 377A, which is the colonial penal code throughout British colonies.
I was going to say, Gurpreet, do you know what's really funny? You expect us to know what these
I
things are.
know.
I love the fact that.
I'm nodding and I'm like, okay,
I'm going
I
to
will look clever, but I don't know what you're talking about.
Okay, so let me dumb this down
Calm down.
again.
No,
Let me
please.
go right at the
Can
beginning.
we have an
So
idiot guide, please? Or what do they call it?
Dummy's Guide to
Dummy
Colonialism.
guide.
yes, so should we start with definitions then, and
Yeah,
the
Go for
kind
it.
of, yeah. So okay, so colonialism technically, Bal and Taj, if you really look everywhere, you're not going to find a standardized definition. What actually happens with colonialism is, in a very, very rudimentary sense, right? It's one country physically going, and taking over another country. That's a very, very simple, at the
basically.
most basic.
That's the one I know. That's the definition I know.
Yes.
I
What
don't. I know better
happens?
than that, Val.
What happens in this? The why is one country going over and taking over another country, right? There's so many levels that underpin the ideology behind it. So the ideology is sometimes what is known as imperialism, right? The thought
Yep.
that is actually that we need to go over and
Make
sort
it
of like
better.
make it better.
Save them.
And yes, and this is what is known as white man's burden. Now, White Man's Burden was a poem by Rudyard Kipling. He's a British poet, came around sometime 1899. And the context in which he wrote was actually the American colonization of Philippines. That's when Americas had actually gone over to take over Philippines. But his broader context was the British Empire. And the illustration, which I will send the slides to you later, is literally a soldier. He's like wearing this cap, and he's got a back turned, and he's carrying this black savage with hair all over, and savage is going like this, and he's carrying that on his back. And the connotation is we need to civilize these uncivilized people.
Yes. Okay. Got you.
right? That is the ideological underpinning of colonialism. So, this has actually had a long history where a lot of theorists have actually, a very, very prominent post colonial theorist, his name is Edward Said. He was a Palestinian, and he wrote a very influential book called Orientalism. And this is where you get your concepts of the Orient and the Occident, right? And one can't exist without the other. So you have to make the Orient into this uncivilized, savage,
Animal. Yeah.
animal,
Oh, okay.
infantilized place for the Occident to be a civilized, orderly,
It's that comparison,
masculine.
isn't it?
Yes,
Okay. Got you.
and in typically in these binaries, right, you can't have one without the other. So if you take away the Orient, the Occident cannot exist because it reflects off the definitions it has projected onto the
Because they're
Orient.
looking amazing when you compare them to this animal, human, uncivilized person, and they can't exist at looking so amazing without the opposite.
See, they
Exactly.
should be thanking us. That's what I'm saying. Okay. Got you. Okay. That's
Yes.
really helpful.
So what happens is in this whole thing, like there's a cultural, ideological, racist connotation that the colonial enterprise was actually one where we went out to the Far East or the other colonies to make them better, to make them in our image because we as white men are better. So
Okay.
this is what underpins the entire project of colonization. And what typically you will see in the fictions that have come out, or the movies that have come out, the narratives that have come out, right, is that even when you have this very, very clearly defined hierarchies that operated in colonies where the British or the Europeans had actually gone to settle, right? You had a very patriarchal setup where most of the soldiers at that time were men, and they had gone to like let's civilize this uncivilized part of the world.
But can I add here? I mean, it's interesting you say that and completely makes sense. But then that was from the white man's perspective. We are the civil people. We will go and save those. But then when the white man then went into India or went east, what then put it in their mind to say, oh, these people are actually civil compared to us and we are going to listen to everything that they're saying? Where did that happen?
So again, it's the hierarchies, right? So the white man exists here, and the brown man came after that. And because the brown man, or the colored man, or the black man was not seen as man enough because they were noble savages. That's again where the term comes from. It comes from the colonial aspect of colonization and conquering these lands. So men in these colonies were not seen as capable of self-rule because they were unruly, they were savage, they were uncivilized, and therefore the white man had to come. That was the white man's burden to do everything. And
But hey,
after the yeah.
sorry, just a really, it may sound like a silly question, but as the brown or black man or the coloured man, they know that they're not uncivilized. So why would they think that this person is their savior? I know it's a hierarchy, but what put it in their head to say, yeah, this person is here to save us? Because there's nothing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't think it was a case of they are here to save us. I think it was a fundamental, like what I'm trying to get at, to the next point is unequal power relations, basically. Right.
Okay,
So what you're having is a model that will be ultimately set up as modern capitalism that came from colonial
got
capitalism.
you, got you.
And at the end of it, there are unequal power relations that are there that go throughout these hierarchies. And it's a model that we see replicated in 2023.
Even now, yeah,
Even
100%.
now.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, crazy.
Yeah. And this is what.
How do we see it now? We know, but then it would be nice to, because I know we see it in movies. Always the white man comes to rescue the coloured person, or
Can I just add to this? I mean, it's interesting because something came out. Although this podcast is going to go out a few weeks after this, there was a story that's just come out in regards to some sexual harassment and rape that's just come out on the. I read it on the BBC, and it's only now. It's taken 2 months for people in power to take any action. I mean, are we not playing into that sort of that theory of they are just savage, and well, if it was us, we would have sorted out and nipped it in the bud straight away. But we're playing into it by doing that.
All of it, Bal and Taj, because if you look at what's happening with, like, the Black Lives Matter movement, the moment you actually see a black man, there's this sense of hysteria that comes with the white who's seeing the black, right? Oh, that he must be this criminal, he must be this bad person. And this is what is going on, right? This is what racism
It's
is
like
also.
propaganda,
Yeah,
because we're
yeah.
fed in that black man is, yeah, this really bad.
Hmm.
We're seeing this in TV. We're seeing it in the newspaper. It's just like, oh, for example, if there's a terrorist attack or something, you'd name the whatever community they're from.
Yeah.
But with a white person, it's oh, they've got mental health issues.
Exactly, exactly. And it's also this way of, like, quite a few months ago I was doing another kind of like podcast where we were looking at how gender inequality and terrorism actually kind of like, play off each other. And one of the questions I was asked was, do you think gender and equal relations create more, like, more susceptibility to, being vulnerable to radicalization, etc.? And I was like, hang on a minute, why is it that, suddenly brown communities are seen as these absolutely regressive, oh, we've got gender inequality, but as if all the rest of the world doesn't? I think it's pervasive everywhere. They're the same kind of, like, models that are operative.
And the other thing is, I mean, it's interesting. What is a terrorist? A terrorist? Well, it comes down to the fact that if that government doesn't agree with their ideology, that is a terrorist.
Yes,
And
and there's state-sponsored terrorism as well. So a state can be a terrorist too.
yeah.
So it is definitions again, right? Who has the power to
Yeah.
define, and who doesn't have the power to do so?
Okay, so let's go back because otherwise we'll be going on a total tangent. Colonialism. Let's go back.
Yeah.
So let's talk about gender inequality specifically because we've mentioned that a few times. Going back to the previous question, obviously there was gender inequality. However, when colonialism happened, you said that it exasperated. Can you just expand on that? What happened at that point?
So, well, one of the things was that colonial laws came into play. A lot of times, like if you look at, the past, when, like I said, we have to be quite mindful not to romanticize the past. Inequality has always existed. In a country like India, the caste system has always existed, so it is by no means perfect. And it is by no means that, oh, there were no problems and then suddenly colonialism happened and then there were problems. No, no. That is not what I think any one of us is saying. What we are saying is through certain processes and certain, administrative tactics and power inequalities that were exercised during the colonial rule, certain outcomes happened that actually made these inequalities worse. So one of them was, like I was saying, the, let's say, take in a very broad term, homosexuality. And homosexuality, let's say in a country like India, if we even go back to, the texts like Ramayana or, the Mahabharata, the Gita, and all of that, actually there's a lot of gender slippage that's happening. And just a very quick example that I'll give you is one of the anecdotes that exists, in one of the Gitas is that I think there was a demon who actually got a boon from Lord Shiva that he can't be killed by any man, etc. And Shiva then gets very upset later on because he's creating havoc, and he goes to Vishnu and he says, I've given him this boon, I can't kill him, what do I do? And Vishnu says, don't worry, I will take on the form of Mohini, which is a seductress, a lady seductress, and I will lead him into a dance, and when he puts his hand on his head, he will kill himself, because I think that was the only way Shiva said that anyone can kill you, if you put your own hand onto your own head. So Vishnu becomes a woman and goes and seduces this demon, who ultimately, she leads him into a dance, and he puts his hand on the head, and he's killed. And then Shiva looks at Vishnu in the form of Mohini and gets really aroused, and they have sex. And the outcome is they have a child, born called Bhagiratha, which is born without bones because technically Mohini was a man,
So, man, yeah,
right?
okay.
So it is very wrong to actually say that, or cultures that existed, Eastern cultures, or African cultures or whatever that existed before colonization happened were, like these absolutely repressive and horribly, I think no, there was a lot of gender slippage and a lot of things that were being negotiated that actually gets clouded with, all of these kind of mindsets that come in. What happened during colonization was that colonial laws, for the first time ever, started being concretized into a very, very formal system. So I think nobody actually knows this, but Britain actually started formalizing their legal code in India through the Indian Penal Code called the IPC.
Okay.
That happened sometime in the 1800s, and I think once they actually formalized, the legal code, it was put in place in 1863 or something. And IPC, the Indian Penal Code, was then lock, stock, barrel transported to all the other colonies. So Africa had it.
But in a way, it was like the test of the guinea pig
Yes.
in
So
India.
Africa's, like Sudan's basis initially, before it even kind of went through all these changes and Sharia law came into play in some aspects, the basis was IPC. Straight settlements down in Southeast Asia, so Singapore, Malaysia, etc., had the IPC. And the IPC codified Section 377A, which is under Victorian laws, homosexuality is illegal, which never existed before.
Mm.
Okay. But then, is that kind of law? Was it in Britain at that point,
Yes,
or
it
was
came,
it?
it was codified at
But
that
it is
time in India.
so prior to that, it wasn't even in Britain. It started off in India at that point.
Yes. Through these there was a mindset, Bal at that time, that how do we actually uniform, make all the colonies uniform, and that happened through education, and
So
that
why
helped.
did they choose India to start it off in? Is there a reason, or is it because they
India
just
was the crown jewel, right? It was the richest, one of the richest colonies, and it was where I think, in terms of trade route, it was very, very conveniently located. So trade was one of the other things that they said. Oh, we colonized a lot of the other lands because of trade, and trade flourished at that time. So India's, I think, geographical position, where to
Makes it
to
perfect.
yes,
The sea.
yes. So by Calcutta was their main port at that time, and that went on to the Southeast Asian colonies, and up from the other side it went on to the Middle East and Arab state for spice trade, etc. And spices were the big thing at that time. That was the gold dust, right? The diamond and everything.
So
Yeah.
where you said that India was the richest of the colonies, was it the richest prior to them even coming into India and colonizing?
I suppose so. I think India was a very, very, again, geographically coveted, place, because like I said, it's seen multiple conquests. Not that the other countries haven't seen, right? We've had the Romans kind of come in and do the same with Europe, and then we had the Ottoman Empire doing the same thing as well. But then India suddenly has been this kind of like, oh, let's get Alexander the Great from Macedonia, who actually came all the way down, from the Hindu Kush side into Afghanistan, and then kind of, started colonizing there. And then the Mughals came in from, Afghanistan, and started doing that. And that brought, the Mughal Empire was very, very wealthy. It was hugely, hugely wealthy. And then we have, like extractive capitalism has actually happened in that sense. So even if we look at, say, Africa, where the slave trade, started, that was where a lot of the money actually happened, by exchanging people, right?
Mm.
By selling people, and that was one of the most, I think, kind of atrocious tragedies that we've had, where colonialism is concerned, the slave trade,
Mm.
which nobody wants to kind of like talk about and see, like what has happened there. So I think it's all of these things, combined, and at the heart actually, lies power. It's inequality, and these unequal relations that existed at that time that have carried through and that are still replicated today.
Okay, so what other laws were then concrete when the British came in? So things like homosexuality was made illegal. What other laws would you say, which we weren't aware of, that actually now we're saying, oh my God, they're not that's not the right thing that should be happening. You know, women's rights, for example. What other things got made into law at that point?
Inheritance laws. So if we look at the way the British operated or Europe operated at that time, women had no power.
Mm.
Zero, right? The way marriages were actually conducted were political alliances. They were arranged marriages in that sense. And
Mm.
women were actually seen as chattel. Also, they were passed from father to husband and then, the son, etc. And that was how it was. Women had no voting rights. Women had no inheritance at that time. Women had no, the saying that what is mine is mine, but what is yours is also mine. So the husband operated in that way. So the husband had his own, wealth, but whatever the wife brought along, was also his. She didn't have any kind of inheritance.
But that
So
happened. Sorry, is that in Europe that's what
yes,
happened? Is
British.
that? But is that also something that happened in the East as well, in India? Because we know that things like the daughter goes from from the father, then gets married to their husband. It was very similar in that case, would you not say?
It was and wasn't, Bell, because like I said, it wasn't etched in law. So what actually, I think there was a lot more freedom in that sense, in the sense that if you look at, again, if you go back, way back, where, let's say, if we take the Hindu custom of swayamvar, I don't know if you know what that is. So swayamvar is basically, it's an arranged marriage, but
Yeah.
the choice lies with the woman, where there's a line of suitors, and
But
she.
the thing is, you say it wasn't etched in law, but it was etched in culture nonetheless, though, wasn't it?
Yes and no again, Val, because the thing is, like I said, it there was a lot of fluidity that happened. So some cultures did, but I don't know if you know, like
Yeah.
if you go to Kerala side, their
Yeah.
culture is actually not
Women.
patrilineal; it's
It's not.
matrilineal.
I've
Yeah,
heard that. Yeah.
So
So
yeah.
it's
why is
women.
that? Why is Kerala like that, but the rest of India, we still have the dowry and stuff like that?
Yeah.
Why is it different there, and what's made it different there?
It's cultural. India is so diverse, right? One of the things that I think we tend to do is kind of lump India into
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
homogenous blanket, kind of like, oh, this is how it happens throughout India. But India is very, very diverse. So there is, and in fact, Kerala is one of the states which has the highest literacy for women and girls as well. Precisely, I think it's attributed to this matrilineal kind of like culture that is there, where even inheritance happens through the mothers. It's a mother passing it on to the daughter rather than fathers passing it on to the sons, right?
This is where we expect you to know everything. I mean, just carrying on from Taj's question. Okay, so it is very diverse, but then why is it Kerala's like that? You may not know this because we're just expecting you to know everything. But
No,
very
no,
interesting.
I think it is just one of those ways, and how we assume. I think that the main mode has always been patriarchy, but
Mm,
that's not necessarily, like, there's this book that was recently released by a journalist called Angela Sani. It's called The Patriarchs,
Mm.
where she herself actually does this through an anthropological study and says that actually, if you look at cultures around the world, although we assume that patriarchy was the norm, that's not necessarily so. In fact, a lot of cultures actually had women in power. It was, through there could be matrilineal, or through some kind of other different forms of power that were there. Therefore, it's never always been patriarchal. There was a shift that happened at a point in history. And again, this is very contested. People say that usually it was around when, agriculture kind of like, came about, and, from hunter gatherers, they came into a more kind of, like a more revolutionized, society. And that's when patriarchy started getting more hold of things. But
Is that
others say,
because,
no.
but then with that, on that theory, whether it's true or not, is that because of men's strength in that case? If we're talking about agriculture, just the fact that they're able to do it, what's the reason agriculture?
That is what is attributed,
Okay.
where now I think it has even been disputed that if we look at hunter-gatherer societies, the way it has always been portrayed that men went out to hunt and women stayed back to cook and, whatever, clean whatever they brought back, is actually not true either, that women also went out to hunt.
Oh my God.
You're changing everything I've heard.
Well, yeah. Oh, so
So
women
a
go out.
lot of it is being, like as more research is being done, more kind of, alternative models are being explored. There is also this, stream that is coming out, that what we have always assumed, that, it's always been patriarchy and that's the norm. Actually, no, it's never
So
been like
why
this.
do you think it is being portrayed like the women stay at home? Is it a way to suppress them and make
Yes,
them
yes, yes, it is. It's a threat thing, right? Like how we are seeing now that as women are getting more and more rights, there's this almost sort of like a backlash where suddenly the rights that we have gained, they're going back. So
like the
US has
abortion?
overturned,
Yeah,
the case on abortion, and
yeah.
a lot of states are making abortion illegal. Why is this, so much, like perceived threat from a woman's body? It's always been there. And we can go back to even partition, Indo-Pak partition, right? Where is a woman's honor always located? Whether that was on the Muslim side or the Sikh side or the Hindu side. It's on a woman's body. That's why so many rapes happened. That's why so many, forced conversions and marriages happened during the 1947 partition, right? The fact that wars are literally fought on a woman's body because that is the first sight of honor.
That just
And
shows how important a woman is because it's
yes,
all about
Yeah.
taking away the woman's rights and stuff like that, but which shows how much power a woman has.
absolutely,
Um,
absolutely.
And yet, as a society, we still do not recognize that,
No,
unfortunately.
no.
Okay, so going back, because I think we can go through a thousand things here. I don't even know where to go anymore. Okay, so going back to colonialism. Where are we going with this? I don't know. There's too many paths. Taj, take the lead. Okay, so let's go on the hierarchy side of it. Okay, so we've got the white man coming in, say the savior. What happened during the colonial period, which has got us to the point where we still think that, whether we admit it or not, in 2023, we still have that, the white savior. I mean, I had that yesterday. I was talking to my husband about it. It's exactly that. And I don't know, and I'm not even going to go into it because it's that embarrassing. I won't even talk about what I thought. But how have we got there through colonialism? How are we still there?
Power, it's the hierarchies, right? And what happens, in this situation is that it's a system, right? It's not something that you say that, oh, 1947 happened, India actually became independent, therefore suddenly there's this chord that breaks and suddenly everything is okay. No, it's system that actually persists and pervades. So this is what we mean by post-colonialism. So colonialism, if you look at it, is, like from the time a country is colonized to, let's say, chronologically, to the point where, a country, say, gains independence. That is the colonial sort of like, period. What is the post colonial? In literary and cultural studies, the post colonial literally happens at the point of first contact, where the colonial powers make with the local population. And what happens thereafter? That is the post colonial. And in the post colonial, what you see is the sort of carrying forward. So let's say, even chronologically, countries have gained independence, but
What,
models remain.
but what is independence essentially is what you're
Right.
saying. Because they
Yes.
wouldn't have said, oh, okay, we're bored of being here, let's just go. It's a case of, well, what have they left behind? Essentially, that is what you're
Yes.
got you.
And the model that is there, it persists in itself to the point of what we call now as neocolonialism. So colonialism functions in a more abstract sense, right? It could be through corporations that are set up, and how NHQ, let's say Coke, is set up in the US, and they come and set up in other countries, and how that actually kind of changes your economic models. The kind of speculative finance that happens through banks, right? Through the whole modern capitalist system, where economic policies that are formed by banks or the International Monetary Fund, IMF, the World Bank, the kind of sanctions that get done, right? Oh, this country is a nuclear power, let's sanction it, that kind of thing. But so is the US, so is the UK, so is a lot of the global North. Why aren't they being sanctioned, right? So it's these kinds of discourses and models that are being kind of brought up, where the power still is vested in the global North, the white, the rich
We're still
countries.
then giving the power to the West side. Why is it still happening now?
And just to continue that question, when we think about when the partition happened, and obviously this episode will go out during the partition anniversary, what systems did the British put in place to make sure, because they still very much have power within India and Pakistan, even till this day? I'm hearing little bits from people, and I'm like, I did not know that. What systems have they still put in after 1947? And again, it goes back to the question that Taj has just asked as well.
I think it's like I said, right? Laws got codified. So it was a legal system that was there as well. A lot of countries, when they actually gained independence and they were forming their constitutions, the whole
Mm,
constitutional model was also based on the European model, on the
British.
British model, right?
Yeah.
Laws that were taken lock, stock, barrel, that, like for example, Singapore refused to actually decriminalize homosexuality. And what
Mm,
happens is it starts becoming part of a country's psyche and identity, right? Oh, these are our laws. But actually, they were never your laws. They were
mm.
laws that were brought in, they were colonial laws, and it becomes very hard to kind of disentangle all of these systems that are there, right? So it was almost as if when decolonization started happening, countries started gaining independence, the way they actually had to stand up on their own was through the models that were left behind by the British, through the entrenchment of all of these hierarchies that were there, the power that was there. And we see that even say in, for example, the tensions that happened in Sri Lanka with the Sinhalese and the Tamils, right? Because when the British were in power, it was actually the Sinhalese that were in the administrative capacity, and earning better, and in those officer positions, and the Tamils were not. And this model then kind of replicated itself post independence, where the Tamils were feeling that we are in the majority here, but we are not getting our rights, we are not getting jobs, we are not getting this, why is this happening,
So
right?
essentially, the power is still, even till this day, with the British, regardless of independence, essentially.
Yes, sort of. Like it's like I said, colonial models that actually perpetuate now, they're perpetuating in a more abstract sense. You don't actually have a country that is going there and kind of saying, "Oh, we are going to, kind of
All
stay
this.
in your land and conquer your land." It's not happening in that manner. It's happening in other ways. It's happening with financial flows. It's
Mm.
happening with sanctions. It's happening with diplomacy. It's happening with all the other bits and pieces that are happening. That is where the global North and the global South and the power differentials actually come in. So those models are being perpetuated in that way.
One thing, whilst we've got you on this episode, because I'm like, I've got so many questions. I don't like. I'm a bit frazzled today. Um, Going back to this, and I keep going back to it. The white sort of supreme power. I shouldn't call it supremacy, because it's never got a good context in regards to that. Where did that essentially start from? Because it's way before colonialism. What caused that? Because that's the same sort of issue that we've got within the South Asian culture. I would have assumed it comes from that, where if you're darker skinned, that puts you more of a negative. Oh, you won't get married, because you're darker. That sort of
Oh,
system still exists
you even see
culturally.
it, for example, if an Asian person asks an Asian person or South Asian person, to do something, it's like, yeah, okay. But if a white person asks
Yeah.
an Asian person to do it, you're like, yes, 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 yes. So
I,
In
why?
the practical terms of what's happening in real life now.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. It's a bit like how we say like in Singapore there's a very colloquial term for this. It's called a colonial hangover, where we see the same dynamics, like I said, being played out in Singapore as well, where if a local comes up to you and says, "Can you do this?" and whatever, but if a white man
kind
comes
of like,
immediate like this, right? It's immediately
like that hierarchy
yeah, yeah.
power. They've still got
This
it.
it
Yeah.
is, it is, and I think it's a kind of like a psychological thing, and a good author to actually read is Frantz Fanon. He's an Algerian, and he wrote The Wretched of the Earth and Black Skin and White Masks, and he was a psychoanalyst, and he was the first one to actually kind of distill into words the psychological effects of colonization on native populations and how violence actually features very strongly into this. So, whether that is violence in terms of a revolution that is being taken up, but also violence in the form of domestic violence. Why is it that violence becomes such an integral form of the psyche when a population is being colonized? That's a really, really mind-opening. It's a foundational text. All colonial and post-colonial scholars actually.
Give us a bit more of a summary of that book. You've
Um,
started off, but I want to hear this now because he's one of the first to vocalize and
Vocally,
write.
yeah, he was a psychoanalyst, and actually these are studies that have been done, Bal and Taj, by different kind of like countries. Like Cameroon actually has a paper on the kind of like backlash that happens. Authors have written, like Arundhati Roy has written it in her book, like The God of Small Things. There's a very, very moving scene on Kathakali dancers who are being they put on a show and they're kind of emasculated at a certain point, and they go home and they beat their wives, right? It's a kind of like this backlash that happens where if in the public sphere we are being emasculated by certain powers, then we
Then
go
we need to go
home
home.
and reclaim that masculinity by beating our wives or daughters or whatever. It's again, it's not a direct causal thing, but there's certain things that get exacerbated by certain power dynamics that actually functioned. Yeah. So
Do you think, I mean, on that point, I mean, with, for example, domestic violence, and we've touched on it very briefly, would that essentially be, now you're saying it, the same sort of power dynamics that you're talking about there as well, then, even till this day, where it is a case of, well, I need to show my power because outside in that world, I have been emasculated, so I'm going to come back and
yeah, I
show
think
my.
there are
It's
studies
interesting.
that do that, but I think a lot of this it's more, right? If when we look at domestic violence, it's a lot more than just that.
Yeah.
I'm actually and I don't believe in this by saying that, oh, just because you were there and therefore it's kind of like an excuse of saying that, oh, this is why domestic violence happens. No, the
Yeah.
perpetrator knows what he's doing. He's very
Oh,
much
so using it
aware.
as an excuse. Excuses
Yeah,
against.
yeah.
Yeah,
So,
fair enough.
so I, which is what I'm saying, that like we have to be quite mindful that we are not romanticizing certain things and not kind of like taking them as a direct cause effect or a causal link that is there, because that is not what it is. It's just that where colonialism and colonial powers are concerned, certain things that were already there but not in that kind of like measure were exacerbated because of these power dynamics or the way the hierarchies were constructed. So one of the things, like people kind of like to say with colonization is that oh, it was a very good thing because they abolished sati in India. Sati was, if
Oh,
viewers don't
interesting.
know, it's the
Mm.
practice of a widow, like just burning herself on her husband's, pyre with fire along with him, because it kind of like signifies the end of her life and the reason for her existence. But in actual fact, sati was practiced in one small region in India in one small kind of like community, and it wasn't a widespread practice across India. Again, India is huge, it's diverse, so is Africa, right? But there's a sense of kind of like homogenization where, oh, sati was practiced, like it was such a barbaric practice and it was practiced throughout. Sure, it's
It's like
barbaric.
it's like picking out the bad bits and saying the
Yes.
whole country done that.
Yes, yes. So I think that there is that missing of nuance that is there when we look at what are the positives and what are the negatives of colonization. The nuances really need to be teased out, and it's not as easy, right? Like when I kind of like went on and you were like, whoa, 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 hold on, we don't know what you're talking about, right? So I think that happens quite a bit where you have to really kind of go into the nitty gritties to kind of tease out certain things and say that, hang on a minute, actually this is not what it is made out to be. Yeah.
I mean, with the Changing Suits podcast, it very much is based on the culture that, especially the second and third, mainly the second generations, are going through and are affected by. Just as we come to the end of this podcast, and it might be a bit more of a conversation than a normal ending, but how do you think our culture now is impacted by what happened back in the days, colonization?
I think one of the direct kind of like consequences has been migration. Even in my own case, like I was thinking about it just 2 days ago, where my grandfather, so my father's father, he used to be with the British police when Singapore was under the British colony, and he was in charge of transporting prisoners from India into the Strait settlements of Singapore, Malaysia, etc., to do manual labor. And they used to do that by ship, right? Calcutta was the port where they used to port, and then they'll take about 165 days or so to come down to Singapore by sea, and then all the laborers used to be there, all the prisoners used to be there performing manual labor. So roads, railways, construction buildings, etc. And I think colonization really set out migration, the way how we all are where we all are
Yeah.
today. That's one of the major impacts it has had. But also I think in terms of many other things, what is considered like hierarchies, right, that have been cemented, the kind of mindsets, like you're saying, from 2 generations ago, that we all struggle, our current generation kind of struggles with, right? And there's a tendency for, I think, say like our grandparents or parents generation to kind of be frozen in time, almost like the time and place that they left in the 50s or 60s or 70s. They still see that today. It's very hard for them, I think, to kind of reconcile certain things, that it's 2023, some of the things are there, some of the things are not there. How do we move forward with that, right? And the current generation, the way I think we experience our own cultural identities, right? What does it mean to be Sikh or Punjabi or Indian or Hindu or anything, or Muslim, in a country that is not majority, that, right? How do we do these kind of tussles with culture, right? And we are seeing the same thing happen on the other side, where migration flows have impacted, like when I came to the UK almost, say, 10 odd years ago, the kind of explosion of Asian food was not as much as what I'm seeing today. Today,
Mm.
it's like the moment you walk out, is like people are eating Thai food, they're eating, Japanese, they're eating
Yeah.
sushi, they're eating Korean food. That never existed 10, 15 years ago on the scale it exists now,
Mm.
right? So it's, I think it's always a process of negotiation, I think, where you are constantly negotiating old world, colonial rules, and what is happening with the newer world, where globalization is happening. Certain models are still there, but there's also another generation that is coming up and is being more aware. Why are we having these conversations, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And we are kind of challenging that narrative, and also saying we need to be more aware of certain things. So yeah. Yeah.
And that, I mean, and that is one of the reasons we are having these conversations. And it is purely to raise awareness of what we think we thought was true, perhaps may not be true. But, you know, we are living in the UK, and, you know, regardless of whatever we think about what happened back then, we are here. And we are able to challenge those, like you've said, which is an absolutely fantastic place to be, because there are many, many people that aren't in that position.
Yeah,
Perfect.
absolutely.
Thanks so much once again, Gurpreet. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on. And yeah, I'm on burnout today because I'm like, there's a
You've
lot
got to
going
do
on in
so
my
much.
brain. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Bal and Taj. Thank you for having me.
That's goodbye from me.
And goodbye from me.
Follow us on Instagram and Facebook, changing_suits, and subscribe so you never miss an episode.